Hello ladies and gentlemen, Top Hat Gaming Man here. Last week on this channel, it seemed that many people seemed to get a good kick out of my video on the history of Street Fighter 2 for the Sega Master System. Tectoy's impressive 8-bit port of the arcade classic pushed the Master System hardware to its limit, and as a result achieved the difficult feat of creating a playable version of the title on the basic platform. As impressive as this 1997 port was, it may come as a surprise to some that Street Fighter 2 was not the last Street Fighter game to be ported over to an 8-bit system. Amusingly, in addition to this, 1999 would see the 8-bit porting of Street Fighter Alpha, a game that is technologically leaps and bounds ahead of Street Fighter 2. So, now bearing in mind what a technical marvel it was to get Street Fighter 2 running decently on this sort of hardware, let us look at the surprising 8-bit existence of Street Fighter Alpha. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad story of the 8-bit version of Street Fighter Alpha. Yeah! After the success of Street Fighter 2 in the arcades in 1991, everyone knew that it would only be a matter of time before the game received a sequel. To most gamers' surprise, this would not be the immediate case, and instead we would receive countless revisions of the arcade favourite. The most notable of these revisions would include Street Fighter 2 Turbo Hyper Fighting, that would speed up the action in the game, and Super Street Fighter 2, which would include the welcome addition of 4 new playable characters. True all-new Street Fighter game would not arrive until 1995, which was a whole 4 years after Street Fighter 2, and rather than this game being a sequel to everyone's arcade favourite, Capcom instead decided to release a prequel. Whilst personally, I do not feel the narrative within Street Fighter games are intrinsic in any way to the gameplay of these titles, it is of note that chronologically story-wise, Street Fighter Alpha is shoehorned in the middle between Street Fighter 2 and the original Street Fighter game from 1987. This game was intended to bridge the gap between the two titles, which is an odd move indeed, particularly when you take into account that nobody really gave a crap about the 1987 release in the first place. Anyway, in Street Fighter Alpha, which was originally codenamed Street Fighter Legends, this would include playable characters, such as younger versions of some of the characters from Street Fighter 2, mixed with the characters from the original Street Fighter game, who were left from the game's sequel. In addition to this, the game also included characters from Final Fight, and even some brand new fighters who would debut in this one. All in all, this was a very exciting time for me as a youngster, as the majority of these characters were completely new to me, especially when you consider I was yet to play either the original Street Fighter or Final Fight, so the roster was particularly fresh. So apart from the characters, let us discuss what else changed. Firstly, this game was released in the arcades on the CPS2 board. This meant that the game was being ran on more powerful hardware than that of Street Fighter 2 previously, that simply ran on the CPS1. As a result, this game would look stunning, and closer to a playable anime cartoon than previous Street Fighter games. So further to the complete graphical overhaul and new character roster, the game would also revamp what is known as the Super Combo system, that would make its first appearance in Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, which is a bit of a mouthful of a game. This is essentially a 3-level super combo gauge, which fills up as the player performs attacks. The player can perform different super combo techniques based on how full the gauge has become. The big change to this implemented in this game was the inclusion of alpha counters, which are special counter attack techniques that let you block your opponent's attacks. Overall, these are just the tip of the iceberg of new features that would be implemented into this game. Varied playstyles would be introduced, such as the auto and normal mode. New techniques would be brought to the table, such as air blocking, chain combos and rolling, and different end bosses depending on which character you choose to play as would feature at the end of the game. This impressive game, running off at the time's new CPS2 hardware, was packed to the brim with content, so therefore porting this game to home formats would have been a completely different ball game to when dealing with Street Fighter 2 4 years prior. So before we get to the task of looking at the ludicrous existence of an 8-bit port of this game, let's look at some of the slightly less taxing examples of porting. Street Fighter Alpha was easily ported over to the Sony PlayStation and Sega Saturn, as this was relatively new 32-bit systems that were much more powerful than the likes of the Mega Drive and Super Nintendo. These strong ports were achieved due to the fact that the source code from the arcade version is incorporated into both these home versions, and the original game only included a small amount of character animations in the first place, making the transition to the 32-bit systems as smooth as Neil from Retro Man Cave's head. Amusingly, Capcom would also port the game from the CPS2 arcade board to the CPS1 arcade board, out of the fear that not enough businesses would want to cough up the money for the new arcade units. This slightly downgraded version would feature slightly less animation, a different soundtrack and less sound effects. In addition to this, as mentioned on my channel earlier in the month, the CPS1 version of this game would see a release in Japan on the obscure CPS Changer, the bizarre obscure Capcom home console that goes mostly forgotten today. So, as we leave the arcade and the exciting modern world of 32-bit, let us move down to the world of 16-bit. While Street Fighter Alpha was not released on a 16-bit system, rather surprisingly, its sequel, Street Fighter Alpha 2, would make an appearance on the Super Nintendo in 1996. As a proud owner of this game, I must say it is not that bad at all, and the system does a decent job of pulling this feat off. This was made possible due to the use of a special decompression chip included in the cartridge, and amusingly, it is the only Super Nintendo game I have ever played that seems to feature load times. Flaws aside though, it is fantastic to see Alpha 2 running on such a device. Now let's head power capability wise to the bottom of the barrel. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it is the part of the video you have all been waiting for. The world of 8-bit. Ludicrously, 4 years after the game's release in the arcades in 1995, Street Fighter Alpha was ported over to the Game Boy Color in 1999. As mentioned earlier, the late porting of Street Fighter 2 to the Master System was not carried out by Capcom themselves, and instead carried out by an external company. In the Master System's case, the porting was handled by Brazilian electronics company Tectoy. But in the Game Boy Color's case, the game was ported by a company known as Crawfish Interactive, who happened to be British, just like me. Crawfish Interactive, established in Croydon back in 1997, published over 40 games for both the Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance. After a 5-year run, the company would close shop in 2002, and many of the employees would head over to Climax to form their development team for handheld formats. So, being handheld gaming specialists, could these people look to achieve what looked to be an impossible task by porting Street Fighter Alpha over to the Game Boy? Well, kind of. Street Fighter Alpha on the Game Boy Color straight away looks drastically graphically different from its arcade counterpart, which is obviously to be expected when you line up the system's capabilities when compared to the CPS2. To be fair, the game does not look anywhere near as impressive as Street Fighter 2 for the Master System either, and we do know the Game Boy Color was capable of some great looking games, as titles like Shantae existed, which looked so good they could easily be mistaken for Game Boy Advance games. So straight away, the game in my opinion is not particularly visually pleasing. It looks like a very average looking game for the hardware, and nothing special at all in that department. The game lets you select from the same 10 playable characters found in the original arcade version of the game though, which straight away was a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. As mentioned earlier, this game made a lot of graphical sacrifices. For example, you will notice the characters do not even appear to have faces. There are also less stage backdrops than characters in this game, which results in many characters simply sharing the same stages. However, this rings true to the arcade original as well, so some good porting going on in that regard, I suppose. Like with the Street Fighter Master System game, with the Game Boy Color game I have to say I once again love the music. I do not know if it is simply nostalgia, but I love the sound of 8-bit tracks, and hearing the tunes of Street Fighter Alpha, rendered for the Game Boy Color, is literally music to my ears. No pun intended. Obviously, whilst graphics and music are important, gameplay and controls are the elements that are really important when it comes to fighting games. Despite the lack of detail in characters' design in the game, the movement and animation is surprisingly quite fluid. Once again, like the Master System Street Fighter game, controls have been reduced to cater for a system with a simple 2-button input. So whilst it remains fun to button bash your way to victory, executing special moves etc. does at times feel unnatural in comparison to the more complex ports of Street Fighter Alpha. When it comes to playing fighting games, I am as casual as they come, and I'm certainly not a skilled connoisseur when it comes to controlling these sort of games. However, the ease of play that makes Street Fighter inviting to players of all skill levels is as present here as it is in any rendition of the game within the franchise. More hardcore fighting game players though may struggle to find entertainment with these simple 8-bit titles. However, the novel factor of their existence is personally entertaining in itself for me when it comes to these sort of games. I think control and fluidity wise, this title probably has an edge over the Master System game we looked at last week. However, as mentioned earlier, graphically this one certainly is less of a looker. Despite all of this though, it is an interesting game and an audacious move to try and publish Street Fighter Alpha onto such a basic system. So, hats off to you I suppose, Crawfish Interactive, for producing Street Fighter Alpha for the Game Boy Color. The British Street Fighter Alpha game. Yeah! Thank you for watching today's video. Let me know in the comment section which other Street Fighter port deserves more attention, or just as importantly, which games in general do you think deserve more attention and should be given a spotlight on this channel. Let me know in the comment section. If you had fun watching today, do not forget to like, comment and subscribe for multiple videos on gaming history published to this channel each and every week. Finally, my channel Top Hat Gaming Man is funded by the fantastic support I receive from the amazing Patreon benefactors, who continuously go above and beyond to preserve this channel's life. So shout outs to Carl Johnson, Shizuka Kobayashi, JD Robbins, Greg Hooper, Seabass the Great, Sint Spacies, Andrew Bazanski, Edward O'Reilly, Quang DX, Spudgemat B, Michael Baker, Hans Christian, The Computer Man, and all of my other patrons. Thank you all for improving my life.